Good afternoon and welcome to the second uh, edition or version of the Road to Resolution 501, the series. And part one of the series was the formation and work of the ABA Criminal Justice, Women in Criminal Justice Task Force. And today we have a really we will have a very powerful discussion focused on moving from gathering data to policymaking for the task force and for Resolution 501. I am Carla LaRoche. I am the co-chair of the Women in Criminal Justice Task Force, and I am also the associate clinical professor at Washington and Lee. I first want to before I pass it off to the reporter, is thank Patrice Payne, Senior Staff Attorney for the Criminal Justice Section, for the work that she's doing. And it would also not be fair for me to not thank our wonderful task force reporter, Miriam Aranjani, who has been spearheading this series. And I will hand it over to her. Miriam is the Ronald and Susan Friedman Professor of Law at the University of New Mexico School of Law. And she also has some PowerPoint that she will share along with the introductions. So thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Carla. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I hope everyone can see the screen that I have up. And if you're joining us now, you may have joined us for the first session, which is available on YouTube. If you haven't already seen it, we encourage you to Google it and look for the formation and work of the Women in Criminal Justice Task Force. It's my honor and pleasure today to thank Carla, the co-chair of our task force, as well as Tina Luongo, who was not able to join us today, but who is the incoming chair, as you can see from the slide, of the criminal justice section of the ABA. And also their day job is attorney in charge of the criminal defense practice for the Legal Aid Society of New York City. Today's speakers, which I'd like to get started as quickly as possible, so I'm going to very briefly share this slide with you that has their names and their titles, and they appear on this slide in order of their participation today. So it's my great pleasure on behalf of the task force to welcome and introduce Wayne McKenzie, who's joining us from New York City, where he serves as general counsel of the New York City Department of Probation. And Wayne is a former chair of the criminal justice section. Next, Justin Bingham, who is the current chair of the criminal justice section and the city prosecutor of Spokane, Washington, which is the site of one of our listening sessions, which we'll talk more about during this hour. Next, Jessica Yeary has kindly joined us from Tallahassee, Florida, where she serves as the elected chief public defender of that district. Albany Burns is joining us from the other coast, from Seattle, Washington, where she serves as senior deputy prosecuting attorney for King County, which is the county that encompasses Seattle. Next, Makita Seward has kindly joined us from St. Louis, where she serves as Director of Communications for the Family and Workforce Centers of America. Dieter Tejada is hopefully going to join us. He serves as the founding president of the National Justice Impact Bar Association, which is a groundbreaking organization of people who are justice impacted and who have gone through the process of still, getting through law school and becoming attorneys. So he's the founding president of that organization. And finally, Daniela Donoso, who is one of our task force members. And she currently serves as a staff attorney for Legal Services of North Florida. We're so pleased that all of you could join us today and look forward to your comments. Now, I'm just going to give a little bit of framing before we get started. And I'm going to ask Wayne to kick us off with his, remarks. But basically today, what we want to talk about is the data gathering in which we engaged as a task force, which included what you see on this slide, both qualitative and quantitative research. So we engaged in both trying to figure out numbers that relate to the question of the extent to which women and non-binary folks have challenges in hiring, retention, and promotion in criminal law. So we did a lot of research on that front. We also mostly did research in terms of gathering sentiments, gathering experiences, gathering real world, interactions that we were able to collect from all around the country, very diverse, set of people. And primarily we gathered that information through these 12 regional listening sessions that we hosted all around the country. We also conducted online surveys of folks that participated in our listening sessions, as well as those who participated in our focus group meetings, which were designed to pressure test some of the ideas and recommendations that we were developing as a task force over the 3 years leading up to the focus group meetings. And Dieter, I know, has joined us or is here with us, and so he's going to tell us a little bit more about his participation as a focus group member. We will also, we did a lot of work to identify what existing ABA policies and actions related to our work around gender equity in the profession. And we identified, those relevant policies in our resolution and the report, especially in the report accompanying the resolution, which we'll talk about at the end of the session. We wrote and spoke and continue to write and speak widely about our work. All of the task force members do so, as well as other allies of this group. So we'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then finally, we'll end with a discussion of what Resolution 501 says. What are the 10 steps to achieve gender equity in criminal legal employment? So right now, what I'd like to do is invite Wayne to get us started to talk a little bit about his role as CJS chair and his support for the task force, and anything else you'd like to share with us, Wayne.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Thank you. To start, I would really like to acknowledge past chair Lucien Durban for actually having the wisdom and the vision to start this task force during his term as chair. And obviously, great acknowledgement to Tina Luongo and Carla LaRoche for chairing, and also to you, who I refer to as the effervescent Miriam Maranjani, for all the work that you do, and a huge appreciation for every single member of this task force for dedicating your time and your talents to this necessary and essential work. For me, there was never a doubt in my mind when the task force began its work that I would be an enthusiastic supporter during my year as chair. I mean, for me, the issue of the underrepresentation of women, and I will say gender aligned and non-binary, in the legal ranks of criminal justice professionals, it's not just a woman's issue, but one that should matter to every single criminal justice professional. And you see, there's really no mistake or mere coincidence that the very first principle of Resolution 501 speaks to dismantling the barriers to hiring, retention, and promotion in the criminal justice profession. Those are the very same pillars that the National Black Prosecutors Association was founded upon in 1983. And so for me, this task force isn't about being politically correct. It's not about social justice and diversity and equity and inclusion. It's more about my professional life's mission to really work towards ensuring that every human being has an equal opportunity to fully participate and thrive in this field of ours. And so the topic even of this webinar, moving from data gathering to policy making, it's an important step in this process. As they say, if you can't count it, you can't measure it. And if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I will sort of wrap up by saying that there's this never-ending debate over whether, as a woman, you can have it all. Well, I say that's the work of this task force And the work of the task force won't be over until you answer that question in the affirmative, right? Your work is not complete until you as women define for yourselves what it truly means to have it all. And your work isn't over until you redefine what it means to have it all for all of us in this profession. And here's the irony of it. When you've accomplished all of that, one of the primary beneficiaries of your work is going to be us men, right? And so I want to thank you for all that you do. And I'm so grateful to be an ally in this struggle.
Thank you so much, Wayne, as always, inspiring words, and we appreciate your allyship. And we also appreciate Justin's allyship as the current chair of the section. And there's so much that both of you, as well as, of course, Lucian and April Fraser Kamara, who it was the chair after Lucian, and she really, as a task force member, obviously very, very deeply supports this work as well, and is deeply engaged in it. So
I also
anyway,
wanted to shout out Kim Parker, who's also
of
on
course,
the advisory board.
thank
We
you so
haven't
much.
had a lot of support.
Also a former co-chair. We've been in existence for so long. We've had so many chairs of the CJS section during that time, but you're absolutely right, Carla. Thank you. So Justin, would you kindly share with us your support as the current chair? And if you also want to mention the remarks that you made, which were so moving at the ABA House of Delegates in February of this year, 2023, in which you sort of shared the importance of the work as well.
Thanks, Miriam. Thanks, Carla. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this webinar today. I'm sort of like Wayne in the way that I look at this, that when Lucian brought forth this idea and it became fruition, it made perfect sense. And why did it make perfect sense, especially as the work started? Because I run a law office. I employ young lawyers. And I unfortunately have seen firsthand over my many years working in a prosecutor's office, the struggle of women practitioners to get to the same spot that men do. And you know, it seems like a fairly simple concept, at least to me, but unfortunately it's not a simple concept because people have their own predisposition on what they think is right and what's fair and what's equal. So the fact that this body, this amazing task force, brought these stories to light, stories that unfortunately make you cringe a little bit. And some of those stories that make you cringe came from my organization. People in my office, the struggles they had as young mothers, the struggles that I had as a manager trying to advocate for them, which was literally like talking to a brick wall. So the reason that I am such a supporter of this work is because it sort of elevates the conversation to a national level. And it also helps people like myself that want to be allies when we're making these same arguments and hitting the same barriers that female practitioners are. When I put forth this resolution, I got the honor of moving it for approval. And then certainly much more eloquent people spoke in support of it. But one of the things that I did say, and I stand by this very, very strongly, is that we in the criminal justice section do amazing work, really consequential work. We derive standards for the practice of criminal law. But one of the most important things that we have done in recent history is that resolution 501, because it affects every single woman that practices law. Now, it talks about criminal law, but let's be honest, those barriers are there regardless of the area in which women practice. So it was the most consequential thing that we have done in a long time, and it probably will stand that way because these issues are non-relenting. This is so ingrained, unfortunately, in how we do business that it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of pushing to move that ball forward. So I'm just glad to be part of this. Whatever part I can play, I certainly want to do that. So thank you for the work that you do and continue to do to make our practice of law just a little bit more fair.
Thank you, Justin. Well, with it, the task force, I think, is really committed to this work long-term. Even though the task force may not exist forever, each of us has been so inspired by the stories that we heard in the allies and the support that has been, mobilized through this work, that I think there's no question that we're all in it for the long term. And this webinar is one step in the toolkit that we're going to be offering to help folks like you, Justin, and you, Wayne, who run, criminal law offices, to figure out, what do we do? We know there's a problem, but what do we do about it? How do we implement these 10 principles? So we're looking forward to these conversations and to continuing to roll up our sleeves over time to do our best to achieve not just gender equity, but I think Wayne mentioned this, we're interested in full integration, and that, we understand intersectionality, that many women have multiple identities that they bring to the workforce. And even sometimes it's hard to separate why they're experiencing what they're experiencing in terms of challenges because of a racial identity or gender identity or sexual orientation, or, any number of things that we heard from folks in the listening sessions. So we know this is part of a greater struggle for equity in the profession. If I may, I think it would be a good time to transition now to those listening sessions and hear from several women who participated, and not just participated, but so powerfully participated that we were left feeling like we wanted to make sure they had a platform, all of them, to really, talk more about their experiences. So I'd like to invite Albany, if you would kindly start for us and tell us about your participation and also the work that you've been doing related to this gender equity work in your office.
Absolutely. Thanks, Miriam. First of all, I'm just a line trial attorney in a large prosecutor office. I was involved in the early listening sessions pre-COVID, and then one of the post-COVID online ones. I've been following the task force works, pushing the data reports in-house as well. Leading up, and especially in COVID, our office, as well as DPD, lost a staggering amount of qualified criminal attorneys. They're ongoing. I'm currently mourning the loss of a female Seattle icon in public defense, but the listening sessions were really inspirational. They were hard to hear. They were both soul-crushing and affirming at the same time. And it's really been triggering in the way that we've been trying to respond, especially to the reports that have come out. The task force and the work that came out of those listening sessions and the reports that came out of it have been just incredibly powerful tools for our in-house gender equity work. And so I can't thank you enough for the work that you did, for the amount of hours and heartache it must have been to go through those listening sessions and to hear those stories and how, they resonate within you, but also just blow your mind at how pervasive it is. Even though we know it, hearing it is still just so hard hitting. But it's having impact large scale. Of course, we're here in this webinar, we're seeing the work you're doing. We saw the resolution, but it's having micro effects as well in our house. I work in a big office in Seattle, but the reports have allowed us sort of a path to explore what's going on at our office particularly. We've done an in-house listening session, and it was really hard, and it's pushed a lot of things to the surface that were not at the surface before. We have a new elected, a woman of color. Her chief of staff is the first Black female chief of staff in our office and probably on the West Coast. And the work they are doing has been informed by this task force, informed by the reports that you've done, and is really changing how we're doing business. They've been incredible tools. One thing that has come out of it is 3 primary goals from those listening sessions, from reading the reports. And we're focusing on pay equity. They've done pay equity studies and have done some leveling of female attorneys in our office. There's been a focus on putting women into leadership. Our new elected has completely restructured the criminal division. We have a gender-based violence unit now that a woman has been put in charge of. There's been a real push for mentorship, for developing trial attorneys, with a woman in charge of that now that's just been announced. There's also a focus on important equitable practices in our culture. We've been losing not just women, but especially women of color. And for us, that representation piece makes such a difference in how we serve our community. So having those guidelines, both in your recommendations and then the resolution, and especially in those hard-hitting reports, have really been able to focus us on things that we're doing. We've made planning group listening sessions for female attorneys, organized and run by HR and specifically senior female DPAs in our office, to try to moderate, to push those resolution guides, to try to just really assess what our issues are and how we can come together and push those through the office. We have equity action groups within in-house, trying to really develop fixes to the issues we see, not just in-house, but in our community and the way we serve our community. We had a data collection team. They made a recommendation to develop an annual report card to measure the impact of diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging efforts within the prosecuting attorney's office. That group is also recommending that we hire an outside professional, and they've just hired an outside professional group to really assess whether or not our data analytics are showing that we are doing all we can to ensure that there's representation among our ranks, and that equity and pay equity especially are prioritized, and that we're not losing those women and women of color and people of color that make our office so diverse and allow us to serve our community. There isn't an immediate relief in sight to the ongoing misogyny we all experience in the system, but there are things that have occurred within the office in response to the mandatory reading that is your reports, Miriam. I can't thank you enough for the work that you've been doing with that, because it's given us nomenclature, it's given us tools, it's given us structure to have conversations among ourselves, to think of ways that we can employ those same stories that we learned in those listening sessions that we read about in your report, to really find ways to help each other, mentor each other, sponsor each other, and push the system to make changes to make it a better place for all of us. So that's really the exciting thing about your resolution and how this is ongoing. At least for me, it's impacting me personally, and I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much, Avani. We have a special connection, which is that Avani graduated from the University of New Mexico School of Law, unfortunately before I was there, but she has a close connection to one of the task force members, Professor Barbara Creel, who's my colleague there. And we're just so grateful through this work to have been connected and to be connected now forever. So thank you for sharing your experiences. I just want to mention that unfortunately, Jessica Yuri is traveling through an area where she doesn't have connectivity. And so she's not going to, unfortunately, be able to join us today to talk about her participation in the listening session in Tallahassee that Carla organized for us when she was at Florida State. But we do have other, we have one other important voice to hear from in terms of the listening sessions, which is Makita, who—
Miriam, before you do that, I would also highlight for Jessica Yeri, she actually wrote a column, which we'll talk about later, but in her own words, if we can't hear it, then actually reading it, From Sweetie to Sisterhood, a public defender's listening session. So before we transition to a person who is able to be here, did want to give that shout out.
Yes, thank you, Carla, for that. So Makita kindly was able to help us organize a historic listening session for law students, which the task force hosted in collaboration with Howard Law School in Washington, D.C., and which was attended by, we invited students from the 9 DC area law schools, 6 in DC proper, George Mason Law School just over the border in Virginia, and then the 2 Baltimore schools. And we are so grateful that Makita so ably organized it for us, and had an opportunity to participate herself in the listening session. So I'm grateful she was able to join us today and talk a little bit about her experience.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, everyone. So for me, when Miriam brought this idea to, it was Carmia Caesar, who was dean at the school at the time. We were talking about how we wanted this formatted and structured. For me, I was always interested in public interest. And so it was no question when we were getting the word out to the different schools and their public interest societies, what this would look like and how we would framework it. And then just making sure that anyone who was interested in, the many varying, intersectionality portions of women and being in criminal justice, that they made sure that they had a word or had a voice and were able to attend. And so when we had these listening sessions at the school, we broke it up into different parts where individuals were able to share their experiences. And I think in this particular instance, a lot of individuals were very optimistic, right? So they had spent their 1L years or 2L years in offices working and had the opportunity to gain some sort of understanding in being in the criminal justice field. For me at the time, I had worked or clerked at the Public Defender Service in the District of Columbia in their Community Defender Division. And so it gave us an opportunity to really sort of break down what we were looking forward to in joining this pathway and career field, but also, give an insight into what we were concerned and worried about. And so I think the listening sessions at the schools and across, like Miriam said, those 9 schools, it gave us the opportunity to truly see what we could deter or work towards before getting into the criminal justice field. And so, we were able to hear individuals say that they wanted that mentorship, that they were concerned about being in a field where it was male dominated and male supported, and that they were concerned about what that would look like if they were to have children, if they were to have maternity leave. So the C501, as I was reading over it before I got on the call, it is important and imperative that this is a lot of what they had talked about those years ago, and it was pre-COVID, right? So we had the opportunity to be with one another and see what that meant. And so for us, for me, being in St. Louis, and there's in the news, it's been our first female African-American prosecutor who has kind of been dragged through the mud as of recently and stepped down yesterday. What that looks like and how that may have been prevented, and what factors went into play because she was a woman, because she was African-American. So, and that intersectionality that you all talk about in 501. So it's figuring out, how do we have community? How do we continue to not let this be a deterrence to students who are in law school, who look up to her, who are saying that this is who I want to be, but now they are afraid or frightened to actually do this work because they feel like, maybe their voices won't be heard. And I know individuals who are in that office who didn't necessarily go to law school, but who are, kind of like, where do we go from now? Or where do we go from here? Because it was so just challenging to be in that office and to know that everywhere that they went and everywhere that they turned, there was something going on. And there was actually an assistant DA who actually passed away maybe a week before she stepped down. So, in paying the ultimate cost and in fighting this fight here. So, I think from the listening sessions that we had in DC, we got a lot of that feedback, and we still followed up to this day with some of the individuals who have continued in the criminal justice field. For me, I currently work in nonprofit. However, we're working on starting a legal clinic here because we see all of the needs that are still so very necessary in our communities. And finding, and my focus being workforce development, we see that there are barriers to workforce and in employment, and this being made one of them, so in childcare development. And so I'm thankful that we were able to host that event at Howard. I know that they would be more than happy to do that again. And if I could be of any help moving forward, I would be more than happy to.
Thank you for that. It's, as a professor, it's always fun and powerful to witness how law students step up, and then to hear Makita's continuation with the conversation, even long after she has left. And so that listening session was very powerful for me to hear on the ground what law students are going through, so I can be more aware. And we could all, as a task force, be more aware of not only the experience attorneys and the judges, but also those who are coming up and who want to do this work, but have concerns. And those concerns were even more highlighted when we hit COVID, when we endured COVID. And the majority of our listening sessions were in person. However, we understood the need for ourselves, but also for those who we had communicated with throughout our term as a task force, that we wanted to know what was going on in their offices and in their worlds because of COVID. And so we had focus groups online, listening session online to discuss what was going on. We also had listening sessions focused on experienced individuals, attorneys online, but this one session was focused on COVID. And then Miriam, reached out to the prior task force panelists who had spoken or testified before us, and asked them follow-up questions about, we understand how you responded and testified before us pre-COVID. Now that we are in COVID, what has changed? What would you like the task force to know as we are working on a resolution, as we're working on policy and more written pieces? And then let's see. And so from that, we developed, I keep saying we, Miriam developed a working document, themes from the listening sessions, from the surveys, that then prepared us to converge on DC and around the nation online for focus groups. And I'll pass it to Miriam for that discussion.
Thank you so much, Carla. I appreciate everything you said, especially about being a professor and listening to all of this. From my vantage point as well, we want to help our students be the best lawyers they can be and to prepare them for the practice. And sometimes talking about equity can be really challenging because we have to give them some bad news about what they're going to be facing. But these conversations open up the space for us all to share what the challenges are and try to hopefully work together to overcome them. So Makita, we will not forget your offer. I do not forget offers of help. I will let you know that right now. It might be a while before we take you up on it, but the idea, definitely the task force was really interested in idea in conjunction with our Fall Institute, the CJS Fall Institute every year, in making sure we were including law students in our outreach efforts and in the mentorship that happens at that amazing conference every year. It's usually in November, the second or third week in November. So I will definitely be in touch with you again about that. Now what we'd like to do is invite Dieter to talk a little bit about serving in a focus group in November 2021, when we were finally able to be back in person. Well, to some extent, there were, some of us, including myself, was not able to travel, unfortunately, because of COVID but we did hear from lots of high-level criminal justice leaders from around the country, as well as other folks. But what we wanted to do was really pressure test what we heard in the listening sessions, all of the research that we had gathered. We had some suggestions that we thought might end up morphing into our 10 principles. And we met with these focus groups to pressure test those ideas and also learn new ones. And so would you kindly tell us, Dieter, about your experience in the focus groups?
Yeah, it was a really good experience. I'm not a woman, but my mom just got here. I was wrongfully convicted as a kid, and my mom was and always has been my number one advocate before a lawyer ever was. So I was, and it was recently Mother's Day. So yeah, there's a lot of. It was a great experience being there. I'm really happy to have seen, that happened a while ago, and then and seeing the 10 principles and all the work that's being done, it's really exciting. You know, I come at it from a vantage point, I guess if we're talking about it from intersectionality. I founded a bar association called National Justice Impact Bar Association, and basically it just represents people that have been through the criminal justice system. You know, there's specific barriers that people that have criminal records have, whether or not they were wrongfully convicted, that they have trying to enter the field. And I think it's particularly important to note that of all the groups, that the fastest growing, far more than men might be the largest group right now that are in prison, but women are being incarcerated at a much faster rate than men at the moment. So I think it's more appropriate than ever that if you're really trying to talk about creating gender equity in the criminal justice field, it was really good experience. I don't remember all the questions, but I do remember it was good. I was also there with a couple other colleagues of mine who luckily were women, because I can only speak to part of the experience. But I'll just note a couple of things that I thought were important too from that experience, and in terms of talking about intersectionality. When I say that, like, there's particular issues that the formerly incarcerated people have entering the criminal justice field, there are there's ways that it affects women in particular too. So when you go through the character and fitness process, if you have a criminal justice record, once we answer yes to that question, do you have a record? It opens up a doorway to basically any questions. And there's a case that went all the way up to the Washington Supreme Court of a board member of mine, Tara Simmons, who she was a Skadden Fellow. It's a very prestigious fellowship, and she had a sterling record in law school and stuff, and had a criminal record from many years ago. Anyways, part of the finding of that she won the case, but part of it, the finding was that there was a pretty bad rampant sexism that went on in the character and fitness process. And that's not the only story that I know of. I know one of my colleagues that did come to the listening session. She had she was denied and still not accepted. She had an experience where she had experienced questions from character and fitness that were specifically like, you have multiple children, are they from different fathers? Do you've been through some trauma? Why haven't you been to therapy? You should have been to therapy by now. Things that her panel was not women, and I don't think they would have asked that of a guy. So I think there's particular things, and I also know that a lot of the women, I'm also on a board of an organization called Women Against Mass Incarceration. I will tell you that the women that have been through the criminal justice system come back and try and work within it, and in the space. I've been in it for a while now. They're incredible, what they've had to overcome. So it really hurts me, particularly that they aren't respected as much in the field. And I would implore you that if you're trying to deal with intersectionality too, if you're trying to include representation in the criminal justice space, I would say number one right now is to try and get somebody who has a woman who has criminal justice experience, because that's going to be very representative for a space where the fastest growing population are women that are being sent through the system. So yeah, that's I guess the main thing I would add is just it was a great experience. I'm really excited about the direction that y'all are going, that we're going in, and I hope that we continue to be involved. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Dieter. Thank you so much for your comments and for telling the stories of your women colleagues. I want to thank Carla at this point for making sure that we included the voices of people who are formerly incarcerated in our work. And also Dieter, for the tremendous work you do to make sure, and you've certainly convinced me as a criminal law professor and as somebody who works with our admissions committee at our law school, and writes about some of that work, that it's really important that we have more people who are formerly incarcerated at the table and making decisions about criminal law. And I want to thank you for what you've accomplished and how you inspire us. You'll notice we did invite men to participate today very purposely. We have a lot of allies who are men, and we need you and we appreciate you. And so it's very purposeful that we included you, Dieter, and Wayne and Justin. So I want to thank you again for your remarks. So the next thing we'd like to make sure you understand, those who are listening and trying to figure out how to incorporate this work, is that it's really been a value of the task force from the very beginning to engage others in our work and to share our work. And so we've done that through many different formats, through presentations, through writing opportunities, through podcasts. And I'd like to invite Daniela, really the task force member one of the task force members who's engaged in one of our writing opportunities, to talk about her experience writing for the Criminal Justice magazine. And also she's participated in some of our presentations as well. But perhaps Daniela, before you go, Carla, would you be willing to share with everyone this amazing partnership that you created with the Criminal Justice magazine, which is the official quarterly publication of the Criminal Justice section? Could you tell everybody a little bit more about that?
Sure. We, Tina Luongo, my fellow co-chair, and I wanted to connect with individuals and have these conversations on these topics from different perspectives and from different vantage points, whether that's in person or online listening sessions, panels, which we'll discuss later, or in writing. And so as we went along through this, the past almost 5 years of this task force, we thought about what viewpoints have not been represented in our conversations and whom else could we invite and would be willing to say yes to writing for the Criminal Justice magazine. The magazine is quarterly, and they have longer pieces and shorter columns. If anybody is willing, we'll talk about points of contact later on at the end, but if anybody is interested in doing a column, it's no more than 1,500 words on a topic of your choosing. And they are very interested and happy to be having these discussions for years and years to go. And so every quarter, I would invite someone to join the long list of authors who've been lucky to say yes to, including my former student, superstar, Daniela Donoso, who can talk about what she wrote about and why and its impact on her.
Of course, as a law student, you have to say yes when your professor asks you to voluntarily write for the CJS magazine. But I'm so glad that, and I'm so lucky that Carla LaRoche was my former clinical professor. I wouldn't have been on the task force if not for her invitation, and she saw a passion from the adversity in my story and thought that my perspective as when I was then a law student and a DACA-mented Latina woman, well, still Latina woman, now I have adjusted my status, but yeah, that perspective was important to have at the table. And so really the piece that I wrote about was just my reflection, because it was very early on in the creation of the task force. And we had been to the listening session in New York City, which we we had a panel at in 2019, the Hispanic National Bar Association. They hosted their annual convening in New York City, and the task force hosted the listening panel for Latina criminal law professionals, traditionally underrepresented in criminal law, to share their challenges through the intersectional lens and offer guidance to other Latinas in or planning to be in the criminal law. So we invited, of course, law students in the city as well. And, I remember many of the women commenting that they had imposter syndrome, even at the level that they were in. And that's something we heard across the board, of people feeling like maybe they didn't belong. And that resonated with me as someone who, growing up undocumented, heard the rhetoric a lot of, should I even be in this country? Should I be allowed to practice law? Not knowing that I really belonged, even on the task force, because I was a law student. And of course, everybody has such impressive bios. And I'm like, Carla, what did you drag me into? I remember our first call, not wanting to talk or take up too much space, because I didn't think my voice was as important as everybody else's. And, something that I really took away, and that writing helped me understand, was that the commitment that I made to the task force was really fostered through the relationships bonded over the task force dinner table at our first meeting. It was the power of sitting next to someone who was so different and having such a diverse representation of women from across this profession nationwide, that had the goal of making sure that women who came after them weren't having the same issues that we were seeing at these listening sessions. So it was a powerful way to just reflect in the investment of the task force members, and how we were going to move forward with these goals. And I'll say one last thing. One of the panelists at the Hispanic National Bar Association, she mentioned that comments that she hears, or racism and sexism that she faces, they were just other heavy things that she needed to put in her purse, heavy things that she always has to carry with her. And I do believe that the task force is doing the work so that women after us don't have to carry such heavy purses or backpacks. Yeah, I don't use a purse. So, but I was excited to do that. Excited to, not when Carla first asked me to do it, but once it was finished, I was glad that I did it. Right. And just like other panels that we've been a part of, we have so many podcasts and law article reviews, because once you hear what's going on, you want to spread it loud and wide, right? So it was impossible to not want to share, everything that we've come across. So I'm so thankful to the task force, and I hope that we continue, we have a lot of work to do, so we should be a task force for the next 10 years, I think, and continue implementing the work.
We may be sitting with our red staplers in the basement office as a task force. Little inside joke if you haven't seen the movie Office Space, because we the task force is officially sunsetting in August of this year. However, we do anticipate, as Daniela mentioned, that the work is going to continue. There's so much to be done, and we will certainly release a toolkit to help folks implement the 10 principles, and we will continue to stay involved with CJS individually and coalesce as a group as we can. So thank you for sharing. And I encourage anybody to read Daniela's column, as well as the other columns that Carla's coordinated with the Criminal Justice Magazine. You can, just Google that. I believe there's certainly ABA members can easily access those articles. I believe you do have to be in order to access them for free, you have to be a member of the ABA. However, if you email me, I will send it to you as a PDF. So just let me know if there's something you want that you can't access. So next, I think, Carla, would you like to say just a few words about, the first but not the last panel that you organized at the CJS spring meeting in 2022, and some of our other powerful presentations, and then we'll move. We have about 10 minutes left. We want to make sure we cover what the 10 principles are, so that everyone walks away understanding what we think are the most important things to think about in terms of gender equity in criminal legal employment.
Sure. As I mentioned, we thought about all different types of ways of getting the task force goals, activities, efforts out. And one of them, besides, as Daniela said, the podcast, Just Pod for the ABA Criminal Justice section, there were episodes from regarding interviews of our task force members, including a reporter. And collaborations that we've had with the Young Lawyers Division of the ABA, the Commission on Women in the Profession, and the Center for Innovation. We also thought about, are there ways that we can invite people to engage in our work while they are also obtaining CLEs? And thankfully, each of the chairs has agreed to allow us to have a panel, whether it be in spring, meeting or in the fall, to discuss our task force events. And so the first panel that we had was in fall 2019 in DC. That was the day after the Howard Law School listening session. And so we were motivated and inspired by that conversation, and then were able to present to ABA members regarding our work. And so we had scenarios built, drafted by Miriam, but based off of some of the listening session conversations, and ask people at each table to engage with that work. What would you tell a person who was who had endured that issue? Do you have resources at your institution? Really, just to get them to think about the real life situations of our listening session panelists / people who testified. And then fast forward to spring 2022, I had no idea when I proposed first, but not the last, last year, 2022, for Wayne's spring panel in Savannah, that the day before Justin Ketanji Jackson Brown would be sworn in. And so we had amazing Court of Appeals judges and state court judges going in experience to then Daniela, who had already graduated but was on the young lawyer side. And so each and every one of us was the first and not the last in some way. And we presented our draft of the resolution, or the 10 principles at that point, to find out what people's thoughts were in the audience about the draft, and also to highlight that we have too many firsts and we need to ensure that there should be people coming behind us. So with that, I'll pass it over to Miriam to talk about the resolution itself.
Thank you so much. Yes, we did a full day as a task force meeting at that spring 2022 CJS spring meeting, in which the task force really went back and forth, wordsmithed, what our 10, I think at that point, do we have 12, Carla? Am I remembering correctly? And then we thought
11 or 12, yeah.
Yeah, 11 or 12, we're like, no, we got to get it down to 10. No, yeah. We wanted to, and we used as a model, thanks to the focus group meetings, there was a suggestion made to model our work after the 10 principles to deliver a public defense system. That was also a resolution, very powerful one. Just as you mentioned, our work is important, but the CJS has put together so many important resolutions over the years, and that one, which I believe is about 30 years old now, it was a model for us, how to deliver a criminal defense statewide system. So, so we came up with these 10 principles, and then we continued over the next, really 6 months or so to fine tune them, and to come up with a list that we felt really proud of. We presented to the CJS Council, the governing body of the 16,000 member or so criminal justice section, and in November of 2022. And that was a wonderful experience. We got some feedback and some ideas, and the council did indeed agree to put forth our resolution. So I'd like at this time to share what is part of the resolution, and Carla, I think, will walk us through it. In fact, if you give me one sec, sorry, I for some reason closed out of it. But we were able to present these 10 principles at the February meeting this past few months ago. And we're very grateful that as a entire body, the governing body of the American Bar Association, several 100,000 member bar association, I think it's the largest professional organization in the world. And the governing body unanimously adopted our resolution 501. Yes, and we're so proud of that. And now I'd like to invite Carla to walk us through what are the key components of the 10 principles.
Sure, I will focus on the bolded points. And the first one Wayne already mentioned, which was create a, can you make it big?
Yes.
Okay. Create culture change in dismantling the longstanding barriers. Throughout the listening sessions and throughout the research that Marianne did for the law review articles and the reports that she produced, there was this underlying theme of like, if we do any of the rest of the principles, but don't actually change how the culture and the process of the office is or are, then all of it will be performative. And so in having this as number one, it is essentially up to not only the administrators in an office, but also those who every day come to do the work, to recognize that it's on all of us to change the culture. There are ways and people who have the power to change policies, to make it easier for us all every day to come as our authentic selves, but that culture is so important. And next, the intersectionality piece, which we mentioned earlier as well, and the idea that someone does not come only as, for example, a woman or a lawyer, but there are many instances of identity that we come holistically as, and without acknowledging and addressing the barriers and challenges that women face in those positions as a person and as a woman and as all the other things that they might identify with, we'll be missing some of the challenges. And I will say upfront, which I think is clear, is all of these are meant to make it easier for people to practice law in their field, in their chosen field, and not to be kicked out. And so number three, training and CLEs. And that you all are watching this, thank you. You means that you're engaged in this. And so, and not only one type of training, but different types which are listed on here, including trauma-informed and anti-racism, implicit bias. Two of our task force members are experts in, now three, because we have a few, I would say a few members who are experts in implicit bias training, and really wanted to make sure that that is part of the discussion. Go to 4. Let's see. Retention and equal pay, equal opportunity. The things that people determine essentially in our society in certain regards, like promotion and worth, not in terms of worth, self-worth, but worth in we will give you equal opportunity to make a salary or get promoted or and make sure that the process for a promotion or a higher salary is transparent. That transparency is important. Flexibility stigma in terms of family planning, motherhood, menopause, age affirming, healthcare, all aspects of life that might require women to adapt should not be a stigma on them. Number 6, the allyship, as Miriam had purposely indicated, inviting different individuals, not just one group to present today, and for the task force as well, not just one type of person, so that there is not an echo chamber. We need to do this as a community. Number 7. Recognize trauma and secondary trauma within the criminal legal system as practitioners, but also as individuals who might have had experiences with trauma, and supporting the resources so that we can address that history. Number 8, the appropriate private spaces and time. Somewhat connected with the stigma, there should be opportunities for people to do what they need to do in order to address their wellness, their lactation needs and family needs. Number 9, childcare and other caretaking responsibilities. We are all part of a community, and so the legal system should not want to inhibit people from accessing their work and their families at the same time. And number 10, evaluation. Just like culture change is important, evaluating how all the rest of these principles are going within one's office is just as important.
Thank you so much, Carla. And I'm sure those in the room, as you listen to these 10 principles, they're resonating with some of the stories that we heard from people who testified, who wrote to us, with whom we've been in touch. And, they're the product of serious deliberation, serious research. We feel really confident about these 10 principles. We feel confident that adoption of them will help employers come closer to gender equity and hopefully achieve it. Although we know that's an ongoing, it's not like we get there and we're done. I mean, it has to be an ongoing, continual process. We appreciate those of you who joined us today to learn about it. If you'd like to learn more about the task force, what we did, how we did it, the 10 principles, how to implement the 10 principles, I'm sharing with you now the final slide, which has all of the contact information of the co-chairs of the task force. Carla's first, Tina's next, and then my information is at the bottom. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We are very, very eager to continue these conversations and really to hopefully continue to keep the really to activate the 10 principles. It's policy now. That's important. That's an important step. But it doesn't mean anything if those policies just sit, on a website somewhere and we don't actually implement them. So it's very important to us to be in touch with you if you're listening. And I wonder if we have 1 minute or 2 minutes for questions now, if there are any from participants or comments. And after that, I hope you'll join me in thanking all of our participants today. Any questions? Comments?
If not, I will thank first those who attended. Next, you all, the panelists, for sharing your stories and sharing the stories of those who are not here today, but whose stories need to be elevated. And then thank you again to Patrice, and let's do this. Let's make the Resolution 501 not only a piece of paper, but a powerful tool that will make justice for all. So thank you.
And thank you, Carla and Miriam.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a beautiful day. Till the next time.